to give Suzana schedule. She couldn't make it, unfortunately. We'll try to bring her in another time. And so what I bring today is actually the result of our study on Wednesday. We have our study group in English, and we were actually talking about prayer. So in a very short time, there was, I thought that would be a good thing to do, just to tap into what we were studying a few days ago to speak today. But when I sat down yesterday to put this talk together, I thought this is going to be easy. I'll just gather my notes from Wednesday. But then I didn't have my pen drive, which I forgot here. So I said, okay, I know that, most of it came from the gospel, but let me kind of go on YouTube and see what's there. And so I ran into a video of a minister called Priscilla Shirer. And because of the video, the lecture is called Prayer, the Seventh Weapon, which is a little bit of a funny title to even associate prayer with the term weapon. So we're going to listen to her talking, and we're going to put that into perspective for you and see why are we calling prayer the seventh weapon. And we're going to find the basis for her talk. She mentions that on this letter of Paul to Ephesians chapter 6. So let's listen to her.
I'm already on board for whatever's next. And so,
I'm already on board for whatever's next.
What do you say to people about the power of prayer? How powerful is it?
Yeah, well, I believe, Paul mapped out for us in Ephesians chapter 6 the spiritual armor. He's like, if you have this on, you will be victorious. The helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit and on and on. And most of the time we stop at those 6 pieces of armor. But right at the tail end of that, he says over 2 verses, more biblical real estate than the other pieces of armor. He says, pray at all times in the Spirit on every occasion for all the believers. He goes on and on and on about prayer as if to say, this is the 7th weapon. And this 7th weapon is the one really that infuses the other 6 with this power that they need to actually be effective in battle. So more than anything, I think that the Lord is trying to remind his people that if you'll just pray, I will hear. I will heal the land. Prayer is the key he has given us to unlock all the power of heaven so that he's just waiting to release it, but somebody's got to use the key. And so if we'll use that key, he will unleash all of his power and his glory, and his presence will be known and felt not only in our homes, but in our world. Glory and his presence will be known and felt not only in our homes but in our world.
Not only in our homes but in our world.
So let's see.
At those six.
Is that because your pastor only preaches occasionally?
Miss Clara, I really would like to help you sell your house. That's why I'm here.
That's why I'm here.
Okay, so while Marcel is fixing, wonderful, right? Lovely. I just love the message, and I love her faith. She's sure about the power of prayer in ways that sometimes I wonder, are we so sure about the power of prayer? Are we tapping into this powerful weapon as much as we should and could? Because it's hard for us to believe. And when I say believe, I don't mean in a cognitive way, I mean in a gut way, in the things that we don't see. We believe in what we see. We believe in what our material eyes can reach. And prayer is something that requires faith. But spiritism gives us an understanding that she perhaps does not have at a cognitive level, but I appreciate very much, which shows that, sometimes you don't really need to know so much. Some spirits bring already in them that faith. So she believes. So she mentions Ephesians, right? And she mentions Paul's letters and the armor. So I went back and I looked at the letter and I was like, wow, what an amazing and beautiful idea that he puts in that letter. And so when he talks about the armor of God. And so here is the passage. Finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For we wrestle not against the flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against the spiritual wickedness in high places. Wherefore take unto you the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand. So, let me highlight a couple things. He talks about the armor of God twice. Not a piece of the armor, the whole armor of God. So it's necessary to take the whole armor of God in order to withstand the difficulties, the battles. Now, this was written 2,000 years ago. Today, and Marcelo used the word demons in his initial opening, and here we see the words devil and evil. So our understanding is that there are no demons, there is no devil, there is no evil. There is ignorance, there is unawareness, right? There is illusions, which is part of each one of us. Each one of us deals with that. When I heard her interpretation of the passage and I read a few other interpretations online, our brothers from different faiths, they understand that we are in a battle, in a war against evil. And often the interpretation is this evil is outside of us. So we have to fight the demons elsewhere, right? In Spiritism, we have a little bit of a different vision. We are in a battle, but perhaps we shouldn't even think about it as a battle per se. We are in a learning process. We are educating our souls. And so we will naturally face trials, face obstacles and tests. And so we are in an exercise of awareness, of enlightenment. And so in this exercise, in this journey, in this process, it is necessary to take the whole armor of God. Now, the whole armor of God has 6 important pieces to it. So we need in this journey to take not only one of them, but the 6 of them. The whole armor in order to stand at the very end. In order to stand victorious. In order to stand in full connection. In order to stand in full awareness. And that's how we're going to understand this. So let's look. We're not going to spend a lot of time here because I really want to get to the 7th weapon, right? But the 7th weapon is what's going to give power to these 6 pieces of the armor that Paul mentions in his letter. But before that, well, I already mentioned that. I meant to make a point in, speaking about these words, devil and evil and all kinds of words that were used at the time, and just make sure that we highlight that there is no devil out there, and so, there's no good and bad. We all the same in a process of growth and spiritual learning. Okay, so he continues by saying, stand therefore having your loins girt about with truth, and having on the breastplate of righteousness, and your feet shod with the preparation of the gospel of peace, above all taking the shield of faith, wherewith you shall be able to quench all of the fiery darts of the wicked one. And take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. All right, so he gives us the 6 pieces of the armor that we need to put on every day as we go on in our daily exercises of renewal. And so here's the armor of God. Our loins always must be girded about the girded with truth. So that's really the belt of the armor. Our breastplate is the breastplate of righteousness. So the breastplate of righteousness. Our feet must be shod with the preparation of the gospel of peace. Our shield is the shield of faith, the helmet of salvation, and the sword is the word of God. So we need all these pieces as we go each day on our exercise of renewal, of love, of enlightenment. We need to be seeking the truth as much as possible, expanding our ability to understand what the truth really means, not our personal truth, but the truth of the universe. I like the idea of the breastplate of righteousness, not a self-centered righteousness, but the righteousness that comes from the feelings, the love, the virtues. The righteousness here corresponds to the virtues that we have in our hearts. And, paving our way and protecting our feet is the message of the gospel. That should be the road that we are traveling. One of the important aspects of the armor is the shield of faith, which, without this protection, this powerful protection of faith, that's really what makes us move towards God and seek the connection. I mean, we need that in our journey. The helmet of salvation, my personal association is, the helmet's on the head. The head is where your ideas, your principles, right? Your philosophy of life, your cognitive self is operating. So you need to have those principles aligned with peace and harmony in order to experience salvation, which for us is a state of peace. And the sword is the word of God, which, words alone don't do much, but if the words are followed by our actions, then they become the most powerful weapon that exists. So this is the spiritual armor, and then the passage is long, so I just brought the first paragraph. Right after he talks about the armor, like she mentioned, he goes on to talk about prayer, which she calls the 7th weapon. So just a little piece says, pray always, with all prayer and supplication in the Spirit, and watching thereunto with all perseverance and supplication for all saints. And for me, that utterance may be given unto me, that I may open my mouth boldly to make known the mystery of the gospel, for which I am an ambassador in chains, that therein I may speak boldly as I ought to speak. And he's going to go on to talk about the need to pray always. So going back to Priscilla's initial statement, she says, that prayer is the 7th weapon that's going to infuse power to all the pieces of the armor. So we can, because those pieces are pieces that each one of us is developing. But when we feel like we don't have the strength, that something is missing, we tap into this unlimited power, the power of God. And God, as she said, will respond. But we have to tap into it. We have to turn that key. We have to move. Before in the gospel, before the chapter that talks about prayer, the chapter that comes before says, seek you will find. Meaning, you must move, you must do something, you must be active seeking in order to hear the response. It's not just say, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to pray and it will come to me. No. It's a collaboration between us and the universe. The universe will help us, but we must be engaged in helping ourselves as well. So, let's go to the gospel now and see what is the contribution that Spiritism brings in the understanding of this incredible and probably underutilized weapon called prayer. So, in the chapter Ask and You Shall Receive, we find this statement by Mark where he says, whatever you may ask for in prayer, believe and you will receive it, and it will be granted to you. Okay, so that's the first thing, to understand what that means. Does that mean that every time I pray with faith and I ask God for something, I will receive what I have asked for? Not necessarily, right? Does that mean that will always be heard? Yes, it will always be heard. And this is very easy to understand, because when my kid comes to me and say to me that he wants to play video games all day long, or my daughter wants to watch TV all day long, I'm listening to them. But I'm not going to grant them their wish, no matter how powerful is their request, right? And how passionate they are about what they're asking me, because they're children. And they don't understand the implications of what they're asking me for. Same thing in our relationship with God. We are children, and more often than not, we don't know what's really best for us. So, a lot of times, and we who have been in Spiritism for a little while, sometimes we'll pray and say, God, I know, may your will be done and not mine. And then you're praying for something a little bit more specific, maybe a job, it may be something, and it doesn't happen. And you say, all right, God, maybe, it's not what you wish for me, but come on. You can't help but be a little disappointed on God, right? Because we still want, deep inside, for things to go away, if possible, right? So we have these kind of little battles with God. But I think once we understand that this is the relationship that we have with God, very much like we have with our little children, it becomes a little easier to understand and to accept what it is, maybe even when we cannot see the reasons. All right, but let's talk about the power of prayer, right? And so what we're going to do in the second part of our talk is to, I forgot my book, is to illustrate, but I know the story in my mind, but I just wanted to kind of read what Chico Xavier had to say. So there's a book called My Pieces on the Mirror, which is written by Marlene Nobre, who's no longer with us. She discarnated a little while ago. And she spent a lot of time working with Chico Xavier. And so she promised him that at some point she would put a book together where she would gather many of the stories and the occurrences of the time that she spent with him, but also that were registered by other people who lived with him, who had the opportunity to live with him. So there is a chapter where she shares the story that Chico used to walk a long way to go to a farm where he used to work at a very young age. And many times he did this trajectory walking. And so he would leave around 6 o'clock in the morning and come back about 6 o'clock in the afternoon. And he said that he always would see spirits on his way. And that every time that he was working more actively in the publication of a new book, he would suffer many attacks. The spirits would appear to him and would curse and would accuse him of being protected by others. And he said that, they were bothered by the work that was being done and they were very hostile towards him. So one of these days he's walking and he sees hundreds, the book says about 600, it's a multitude of spirits who show up in front of him on his way to work. And he got scared because the spirits were very, very angry, were yelling, Some of them were holding weapons, and it was a very disturbing image. I mean, I would be disturbed if I see one spirit. Now, let's think about 600 of them, right? So, he is scared. And so what he does is he remembers of praying, he kneels down, and he starts praying like with a lot of faith. But in his prayer, and this is what I wanted to read, he says something like, "Dear God, help all these spirits who are in front of me. Bring them light so they can see the truth in your love. Help them." So his prayer was not like, save me or get rid of them or anything like that, but like, help them. And then he says that something really interesting happened, because as he is praying, one by one, the spirits start to disappear. And then when he's done praying, all the spirits are gone. Emmanuel, his mentor, appears in front of him and says to him, "Don't ever, ever forget about praying and the power of prayer. And you will always be protected, and I'll always be with you." And so this is it. One small prayer. When Priscilla makes her interpretation of the passage and the armor, she talks about this war and against the evil forces. And like I said, she places it outside of us in the evil spirits. So in spiritism, we understand that there is this battle, so to speak. We do have spirits who may be against us, against what we stand for, against the goodness. They're not evil. They're not different than us. They're just like us. And the best way of winning over them is by loving them and by loving our own selves. In that way, we transform not only ourselves, but we transform all of them together in an effort and in an exercise of unconditional love. So this is how we win this battle, not by asking for them to be taken away, but by loving them, forgiving our own selves, because if they're there with us, with the exception of Chico, who had a mission and they were against the mission that he stood for, but most of us, our spiritual companies have to do with where we stand in our level of awareness. So there's a need for the education of the whole group, starting with us. All right, so there's another little story in this same chapter that's also very interesting. He says that the spirits did all kinds of things to him. And so sometimes if he would trip over something, he felt like the spirits would end the job by pushing him so he could fall all the way down. And one day he's walking and he falls back and hits his head on the ground. And he's starting to stand up and he's about to complain when he hears the voice of Emmanuel in his head saying, "Thank them." And he's like, "What?" And Emmanuel's like, "Thank them." So he was very obedient. That's one of his characteristics. So he says, "Thank you, my brothers, for everything that you do for me." And then he gets up and he keeps walking. And he asks him, "Why did you make me thank them?" And he says, "Because if you complain, you are going to enter the same level of vibration and you are going to strengthen them." Look how interesting this is and how profound this is. So anytime someone insults us, is hostile towards us, if we respond with the same level of vibration, we are strengthening that person. We are nourishing that very same energy that has been thrown in our direction. So Emmanuel teaches him, let's say, thank them. Be different. Do you think that they are lost? How different are you? Can you actually behave any differently? That's what we're really invited to do, correct? So, two really interesting stories from this book. And then going back to the gospel, we learn about the transmission of thought, which we were talking about this last Wednesday. So this is one of the things about spiritism, right? So we have faith, but we also have some, how does that happen? All right, if I'm here praying, how does my prayer go somewhere? And where does it go? And who listens? And who answers? Is it God? If I pray to Virgin Mary, if I pray to Bezerra de Menezes, are they listening? Now, if in all the spiritual centers of the world, people are praying for Dr. Bezerra de Menezes, the Spirit, at the same time, will he hear all of the messages? And more importantly, will he answer all of them? How does that happen? How is that even possible? Right? So when we delve into the works of Andrew Lewis, we get all these answers. All of them. In the works of Andrew Lewis, in many different books, there is a deep and detailed explanation of the power of prayer. And so what I will do now is share a little bit of that with you. But one thing that we learn is that we all immerse in the universal cosmic fluid, which is this, you could call energy, primitive energy that gives rise to everything. And so imagine fishes in a tank. That's basically what we are. And so once one fish is moving, what happens to the water? Waves vibrate, right? So the fish that's on the other side of the tank receives those little waves, that vibration. Same thing with our thoughts. Our thoughts, we create them, and the strength that we put in the thought and the will behind the thought, it is what will power that thought in the direction that we're launching it. So it creates waves, if you will, in the universal cosmic fluid, which is like the water, right? And will reverberate through space, and everybody's going to feel it because we're all connected to this fluid. And the thought, because of my thinking, it will get to the place where I want it to go. So let me share with you from book Action and Reaction, chapter 11. So let me find it. It is called The Temple and the Purgatory. Now, here we have Andrew Lewis and his mentors in the spiritual realm. They are in what we call the lower zones of suffering, tremendous amount of suffering. And they go to this place, it's a temple in these zones of suffering where the spirits can go in and can pray. So once they walk into this temple, first of all, they're taken by deep emotion because of the vibrations of the temple, and they immediately fall in prayer themselves. And then they are observing the temple, and the temple have those niches, which I put a picture over there. So these empty niches that, according to his mentor, give every single person the opportunity to talk to heaven according to their faith. Many different faiths, so it gives them a little privacy. They go into their niche, and each person, in the way that they experience their faith, they will go and they will pray. And he explains something that I think is really cool. He says, until the soul acquires infinite wisdom, it must travel the long road of the symbols of learning and culture that guide it along the pathway of intellectual growth. So while we learning and growing, we need the culture, we need the religions, but these one day will all disappear. Okay? We will no longer need religions and specificity of cultures because we're going to have just, the wisdom that encompasses it all, right? So he says, the divine powers that govern us have determined that every kind of honest and respectable faith should find loving veneration here. So it's a place for all faiths, which is really nice and really beautiful. So they notice a small group of people who are praying. And so they say, some are standing, some are seated, some are kneeling. People are praying according to their culture and their beliefs. And he says, as long as mutual respect is observed, anyone can pray as they see fit. So no right and wrong, should be that way, no. As long as there is sincerity, right? That's the most important thing. So let's say, let's observe this first woman here. So they see a woman who is praying, so let's observe her. So they put their attention in that lady that was praying. And to my surprise, Andrea Lewis says, I saw a beautiful picture. I saw a beautiful picture taking shape little by little, as if it were emerging from the lily white wall. It was the living reproduction of the lovely sculpture by Teixeira Lopes, representing the Most Holy Mother mourning her dead divine son. So the woman is there, she's praying, and she is praying to Mary. And in the niche, the fluids of the niche take the color and take the shape of her own thoughts. Okay? So that's what he explained here. It is her own creation, the reflection of her own thoughts. They adjust the sensitive material of the niche to form the colorful, vibrant image that corresponds to her desire. So a really beautiful explanation of how we think, we create. And there they're seeing the creation. So she's thinking in her faith strongly. She believes, she's asking for her son, actually. She's saying, Most Holy Mother, Divine Lady of Mercy, take pity on my children wandering in darkness. It's how she starts her prayer. For the love of your Son, sacrificed on the cross, help my suffering spirit so that I can help them. And she goes on in her prayer. Then they look at another woman. And now this woman is asking for the protection of this saint, Saint Therese of Lisieux, who was a gentle Carmelite nun who discarnated in France. And her image too is being projected inside the niche where she is praying. And then they look at another person, and that person is praying to the spirit Bezerra de Menezes. And his image is also being projected on the niche. So the question is, and the question is asked for each one of these spirits. So for the first one, the mentor is going to explain, because they ask, okay, so the first woman is praying for Mary. Is she going to answer the prayer, she herself? Okay? And so that the answer is, it doesn't mean that the prayer is being answered by the Holy Mother herself. Petitions like this one rise to the higher realms and are received by the emissaries of the Virgin of Nazareth in order to be examined and answered according to the criteria of true wisdom. So one of the things that we learn is that these spirits, highly evolved spirits, they have teams of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of spirits that work under their guidance, and they are legitimate representatives of their thoughts. And so imagine how many people in this world, right? I myself included, often pray for Mary. And so, especially when you're in need of a mother figure, that's a lot of people reach out to her. So that was one of the answers. Then they ask about the saint, and it was interesting because, André Luiz and his friends, they're like trying to learn. So he said, what if someone is considered to be a saint on earth, but when that person passes, he or she is not necessarily a saint per se? What happens for the people who are praying to that particular person? So what do you guys think? It will go unanswered? No, right? It will be received by other spirits who, in name of love and good, will take that request and will answer. Okay? And will answer. And the same thing was asked in regards to Bezerra de Menezes, right? So how can he answer to all the prayers that go to him? So here's what the mentor said. After more than 50 years of service to the Spiritist cause, Bezerra de Menezes had the right to assemble a large team of collaborators who serve under his banner of charity, of studious and actors, in the sowing of the good which he performs in the name of Christ. And he says, as happens in radiophony, where one broadcasting station with several receiving stations is like one thinking brain with millions of arms. That's a nice picture. One thinking brain with millions of arms. Great missionaries of the light, working for the good, can reflect themselves to dozens or hundreds of workers who follow their guidance in working for the Lord. Lovely invoking so many spiritual institutions and homes, Bezerra de Menezes helps all of them, either personally or through the spirits that faithfully represent him. So we have an army of good spirits in a very organized way, ready to answer our prayers. Okay? So we saw the power of prayer in the story of Chico, what that can do. We're looking here how it couldn't be any different, right? If we here organize ourselves as a system, there is also a spiritual system in place to take care of all of us. And that's how God personally takes care of each one of us. Because God is in the command of all these workers in a hierarchical way. Very much like we do in our companies, right? We have a hierarchy. So the president should know everything that's going on and addresses every issue, but not necessarily personally, but through its staff, so to speak, to its workers. All right, so let's look at last piece of information that I think helps giving us an idea of the power of prayer. So well put by Priscilla Schreier. I think that's how I pronounce her name. All right, so this is the story. This is in chapter 13 of Action and Reaction. And Andrew Lewis and his friends are helping a woman named Poliana and her son Sabino, who is very ill and depends on her. She's extremely, extremely poor in Brazil. And the spirits, Andrea Lewis and his friends, they go into her house, they are there to help her. They look at her and they identify an alarming cardiac arrhythmia. Her heart was like a restless prisoner entwined in arteries constricted by strange calcifications. So they're looking at her and they're seeing that she's about to lose her life. Okay, her cardiac situation is very complicated, but it's not for her to die in that moment. It was not the time for her to pass. They say she needs more time because her son cannot survive without her. So they walk around the house looking for something. And the description is, the miserable shack lacked just about everything. But Silas, who is the mentor, is looking for something that he could use to assist the woman. So he finds a jug with very little water in it. So the spirits go and they energize that water. They put fluids in that water. Then Silas goes and reaches out to her throat in the thirst center in her nervous system, and she feels thirsty. Because there's nothing really spectacular on this. We can affect each other. We can definitely mentally affect each other. The spirits are able to also mentally, with the power of their minds and energy, access our physical bodies. We can do the same. So they trigger the thirst and she drinks the water. The water makes her sleep. She falls asleep. And now she's outside of the physical body. Once she's outside of the physical body, they report that she didn't have enough lucidity to discern their presence. Nevertheless, he asked the group to pray. Silas, the mentor, asked the group to pray. And so he does a very, very, very heartfelt and emotional prayer. And the universe responded. Because the universe will always, always respond to our heartfelt prayers. That has nothing to do with the words that we choose. That has nothing to do with the place. that has nothing to do with the religion that we embrace, but has everything to do with our sentiment, our faith, and our connection with God in that moment. So the response from heaven is described as bluish scintillations halo his head, and as an answer from heaven, right there, amid the wild vegetation of the isolated woodland, we saw off in the distance and at different points 5 flames quickly coming towards us. When they reached us, the flames changed into fellow spirits who greeted us joyfully. In a few minutes, imponderable energies of nature combined with substances derived from medicinal plants were brought to our patient, who inhaled them in long draughts. Soon, Pollyanna was surprisingly improved, ready to retake her physical body for the necessary recovery. So sometimes we'll be assisted when we are outside of our physical bodies. We'll receive the energies. There is not one prayer that goes unheard. And the power that Priscilla talks about, she does not know these things in this cognitive way, but she knows deep inside. She knows more than many of us know, because she talks about it with the certainty, with the belief that I wish I had every single moment of my life. She talks about, let's open, use the key, and open and unleash all this power that's available to us. We don't need to do alone. It's not meant for us to do alone. We are not alone. And we will receive many times, we will not even realize the blessings that have come towards us. The gospel has a little story about a man who is in the desert, and he is looking for water, right? And then the Spirit whispers in his ears, go that way. And suddenly he turns and he goes in the direction that was whispered to him, and he finds the water. He may say, how lucky I am. Or he may say, thank God, because I know you brought me here. So whenever in doubt, just thank God. Because most likely you have been helped in everything that we do. We're never alone. Never, never. So thank God for everything, and don't forget to pray. In a closing statement, Andrea Lewis says, you, the reach of earth, I thought to myself in tears, where is the power of your gold-stuffed coffers before the simple radiance of a prayer? What is the greatness of your places of splendor and jewels when compared to one single minute of the soul's reverence in communion with God's paternity in the majesty of heaven? So what is it, right? So as we leave today, let's remember the armor and let's power it with the power of prayer. Don't forget to take with you every day, in the beginning of the day, make prayer not a moment that you choose to connect with God, but maybe your everyday eyes. When you enter a place, a house, may God be in this house. When you leave the house, may God be in this house with the people who received me. When you wake up every day, thank you, God, for another day. For everything that you've given, thank God. Ask whenever necessary. But the most important thing is to make prayer just a part of our daily lives as much as possible. It doesn't need to be said, I am going to pray. A thank you, a recognition, a short thought. That's the goal. The goal is to make prayer not a moment that we stop to pray, but a way of living. Because it means that at each moment of our lives, we are striving for a higher connection, and we are unlocking the infinite power that is available to us, which is the power of God's love. Okay, so let's do our final prayer. I'll put that in a minute for you before we go to passes, but I would like to ask you if you have any comments or questions at this time.